Hello, Michelangelo in New York. How are you today, my friend?
Hi, David. How have you been?
I've been just peachy, so to
Great.
speak.
Yeah, yeah.
All of you listening here, you know who this is about because I put it up in the title of in the YouTube video, and I'll probably put this in Anchor as well if you're just listening. So you know who this is about. Michelangelo, though, doesn't know who it's about yet. Before we
Yeah.
started talking, I sent him 3 charts with the name and date blacked out. He knows it's some historical personage. But I thought, let's play a game here. He doesn't know who it's about, and he's not going to be able to say who it is in the necessarily. You can't expect that from astrology. And really, astrologers shouldn't be studying charts where they don't even know who it is. But I thought, let's do it. I'll guide him gently if he goes too far afield. But just interesting what he can see from only the chart and nothing else. He has no idea who this person is. And I sent him 3 versions of this person's chart. One, because I'm going to make this available through a link to anybody listening here. One is going to be, I could do it another way for the video. I could actually put up the chart on the screen, but maybe I'll put in a link anyway so they can download it. And that with the name of the person. One's going to be the chart as I do it. That's the one that has EZ at the top, the ecliptic zenith point. Those houses are 30-degree houses from the ascendant, which are really the houses people should use, along with another chart that's the right ascension chart. That starts with the midheaven and has 30-degree houses. But also included a normal chart in Placidus system that I abandoned quite a while ago because it's these systems where the midheaven and ascendant aren't equidistant 90 degrees make really no sense, but most astrologers haven't woken up to that yet. In any case, because it's a very used chart, we're going to use that too. So Michelangelo has the advantage of 3 different chart frameworks, the disadvantage of not knowing who it is. So Michelangelo, now I ask you, of course later we'll talk about who it is and then get into that even more deeply, but let's start out. Remember, listeners, he has no idea who this person is. You can look at either of those or any of those charts. You'll probably start with the one with Placidus because that's one you're used to using, and start talking about this person. I will say the person is male.
Okay. Well, thank you, David, for allowing me to parade my ignorance for
No,
our listeners.
I asked you before if you're willing to do this. It's like a game. I know it's really hard to do, and astrologers really shouldn't do it. It's like going to, I don't know, going to a doctor and saying, person A has this symptom, this one, and this one. Tell me about this person. How are they going to progress? Well, tell me, the doctors. I have to know. I have to see the patient. I have to know. So it's really not fair what I'm doing, but hey, it'll be interesting to see what you come up with anyway, and that's why we're doing this.
Sure. No, I'm certainly game. I just wanted to inject a little humor into the proceedings because
yes.
well,
You're
I'm
no
sure
coward. I know that. The way you speak out against these things that they're putting in people's arms that we won't go into deeply because we're going to put this up on YouTube. But I know you're no coward there.
Yeah,
in your life. Right?
So we do have a time chart, although I don't know what that time is, which is fine.
The time is I think it's relatively exact, even.
Okay.
Because even in older charts, there are people that did write down the time. And
it's amazing how many modern personages you have no idea what time they were born. It's really
a lot of people, like actors, might even lie about their birth date to make themselves seem younger, right?
So, oh yeah.
So you don't know the date exactly. So what would you say in general about this person?
The first thing that leaps out at me, looking at I think either of the non-equatorial zenith charts is the preponderance of Virgo in the map. I mean, we have Sun, Venus, Mars, and North Node.
Yes.
And again, I am looking at Placidus right now. I mean, there is a
I have it on the screen too. Yeah.
Substantive difference between that and the equal house. I'm looking at there is a bit of a difference between that and the equal house, but for the sake of argument, I'm looking at So, and actually, if we want to go beyond that, we have 2 of the 3, what I like to refer to as the big 3 signifiers that are in Earth, right? Because we do have a time chart, so we can say that the 20-degree 19 Taurus moon is accurate. So we have both sun and moon and Earth. So we have quite a few planets in Earth.
Oh, and the ascendant.
Oh, and the ascendant, which is Capricorn.
Capricorn,
So, we might argue that a Capricorn ascendant means that this person has a certain grounded approach to life. They might be someone that if they are working with theoretical concepts, they would try to root them in some sort of what's the word I would use? Some sort of paradigm that people could grasp rather than going off into the ethers. Now, I would think there might be a tendency for them to do that, though, of course, because they've got Jupiter in 9 in its own 9th house.
Yeah.
In Scorpio. Just if there's any deficiency in elements. Yeah, we don't have any. We don't have any fire in the chart. That's interesting.
Neptune, but that's a generational.
Oh, is Neptune in fire? Okay, yeah.
Well, in Leo, but that's a whole. It's a generational thing. It's not a.
Yeah, and we could argue then the singleton fire might predispose this individual to be one of two things: either extremely fiery in the way that we normally would sense it, or the converse, rather removed and not passionate or committed or whatever. Those are just sort of general things.
So either extremely fiery or the opposite, you say?
Yeah, I mean, have you found that with singletons, David? That
I never thought about that particular aspect, that it'd be one or the other. I never really. It could well be, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can speak from personal experience with my own chart. I only have one planet in air, and that's Neptune. Yeah. So I can go to the Neptunian things, but I'm also very good at communicating. So it seems to focus that. What else can we say?
What was the first thing you said about him with all that Earth?
Well, a lot of Earth. I mean, if we got five. I mean, leaving the North Node aside, but 4 signifiers in Earth and Sun, Moon, both in Earth. So, we would tend to think that this person would be not necessarily Earth-bound, but someone who is, rooted in some sort of systematized approach to reality.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. Jupiter in the 9th, as I said, could cause them to swing the other day, and it might mean that they did have a certain philosophical bent, which would offset nicely the preponderance of Earth. And I note that there is a wideish. Oh no, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. What am I looking at here? Yeah, there's a wide opposition between the Moon and Jupiter, and I think I've talked to you about this in other contexts. That this has a lot to do with people who can be overtaken by emotion or have a great capacity to channel and express emotion. Now that could be maybe not necessarily in a theatrical sense, although we could see that, but through writings or through compositions or something of that nature, they have a tendency to over dramatize at times. Let me see what else. Oh, I'm not showing that. I'm not showing that as an opposition here on your map, but because
it's the orb. The orb is like what is that orb there?
Yeah,
19 to
13 to 20. That's what I would.
Oh yeah, which chart? I have another chart in the screen. Okay, 13 to 20. Well, 7 degrees. Yeah, it's in the opposition phase, definitely. Yeah. It's just the aspect set that I chose here that has orbs that are a bit reduced.
Yeah. What do you remember? What orb were?
I think I have orb 6 degrees for an opposition in the aspect set that I chose. By the way, people, you can get this OmniCycles program at the moment for free. Fantastic program. Does certain things that no other program in the world does, and these charts are from that program. You can put in your own aspect set. There are many to choose from, or you can make up your own. So there might be certain aspects there that you would see in somebody else's chart because they use wider orbs than this has.
Yeah. So in the Placidus chart, I noticed that the 1st and 7th houses are extraordinarily small, which is really interesting. So maybe we should consider that. Maybe we should look at the equal house chart more. But in either case, it seems that we have a few planets in 8. These Virgo planets go into 8. So 8 is what? 8 is the house of well, let's use the cliche thing: sex, death, money, transformation, other people's money, inheritance, all these types of things. So maybe this is a person who, well, it could be one of the things. Maybe they're someone who handles money or handles those sorts of concrete things. Or conversely, again, these would be people who would do very deep dives into the subconscious, perhaps. So they would, wouldn't necessarily be a therapist, but again, someone who maybe brought a certain psychological dimension to the work they do. There's a
okay, yeah. I'm not going to say yes or no for any of this. I'm,
no, sure, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, one of the things I want to say too, of course, is that when we look at these things, all of them are going to manifest along a certain spectrum of manifestation. So, we can argue one extreme or the other. It may be somewhere in the middle, or it may in fact.
Well, we know that certain things you can't tell in a chart. You can't tell the sex of the person chart. You can't tell the intelligence level either. Really, you can just say, well, if they're intelligent, it's this type of intelligence, for example. You can't tell whether the person's good or bad from the chart. People do it all the time with Trump's chart in these leftist astrology groups. They'll say, oh, look, this is proof he's a liar because he has this aspect. It's total nonsense. You can't tell the ethical level by looking at someone's chart, not even in Hitler's case. You can just say, if he's a bad person, he's going to be really bad. If he's a good person,
Yeah.
So, there's certain things that they're impossible to tell. Nonetheless, you're, coming up with quite a few things here that aren't on that level, but certain things. What else strikes you about the chart? I don't know. To get there.
Well, I mean, I note that Mercury and Saturn are in the same domicile in both equal and Placidus. Am I right about that? Yes. So they're not conjunct. Now, if they were conjunct, we would say, well, we often find Mercury-Saturn aspects, particularly conjunctions in the charts of people who are tremendously. I mean, I don't want to say intellectual, but there some people would argue that, but they seem to have a certain capacity to, organize and codify, information, that they which can translate in some people's minds to extreme intelligence. It's a certain scientific bent, I think, with Mercury Saturn. But as I said, they're not quite. They're not conjunct. They're 12 degrees apart. 12 degrees apart. So, but still in the same sign, in the same house. I think we could make that argument that this is someone who probably has a certain intellectual rigor. What else? Moon. In the Placidus chart, Moon is right at the IC, which is interesting. Because it certainly, suggests that this could be a person bringing in, if we associate the IC with the heritage of the family or inherent gifts, this could be someone bringing in very pronounced literary abilities. And in the equal house chart, of course, that moves further into the fourth. What else? Pluto in the sixth.
Pluto in the sixth. All right.
Yeah. Again, Pluto. Of course, it's in Cancer. That's a generational signature.
Wouldn't it?
We often associate six with, of course, the Virgoan concepts. Well, first of all, health. So maybe, to jump into my bailiwick for a minute, maybe this would be a person who might have certain kinds of health problems along the line, perhaps even cancer, Pluto and Cancer. That sounds cliche, but it isn't necessarily. But six, of course, is also about service. And some commentators have even extended it to the idea of mentorship, the idea of so this could be someone that might function in that kind of capacity. Let's see. There's what is this? A trine between? Trine between Jupiter and Pluto. Now, often Jupiter-Pluto aspects are found in the charts of people who engender tremendous amounts of money.
Yeah.
Particularly here with a trine, again, could be possibly through writing, maybe even philosophical writing, although that wouldn't necessarily be big money. Maybe, novels or poetry or music. But as I said, there is this tremendous preponderance of Earth, which is interesting. I remember doing an essay and talking about various authors, and Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote all those fanciful Mars novels, had a grand trine in Earth, and he was he was someone that looked at some of the tabloid literature that was being written at the time and said, "Oh, I can do much better than that." He just started writing.
Yeah. Okay, now suppose I give you just a little hint. Suppose I tell you this person is not known as an intellectual.
Okay, all right.
Because on the one hand, as I said, you can't, you could have any chart, you could be this, and you can't tell the intelligent person exactly, but this person is not known as an intellectual.
Okay, so not an intellectual, though, so probably then not a philosopher or
no, not in any field that would be considered an intellectual field.
Yeah. So
but I mean, that's like saying, even if a person were a garbage man, it could be a garbage man that does things in the most rational way possible. I just because somebody's not an intellectual doesn't mean they don't have any intelligence.
Yeah, it's not
in what
it's not Bertrand Russell or.
Yeah, but it's nobody in any intellectual field. I will say that. How would then the way you view the chart, and there's no way you can see one or the other in the chart anyway. So you were going out on a limb. Somewhat.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to speculate. I mean, again, all that Virgo.
Yeah.
I mean, even if this person isn't intellectual, they've got a discriminating brain, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is someone who, whatever their discipline might be, they're going to bring a certain exactitude and precision to it, right? Because
now, assuming the person's not intellectual, what kind of person could they be then?
Well, the Moon Jupiter oppositions, suggests to me, this could be someone in the theater. This could be a performer.
Okay.
Because again, Moon Jupiter, it has a certain histrionic proclivities, but also Moon Jupiter could be someone who, as I said, channels emotion by other means. So a composer.
Someone who channels emotions by other means.
Yeah, rather than necessarily, portraying people on stage, right?
Now let's flip here, right? Now I'm gonna reveal things here. I think you did a pretty good job. I'm gonna explain why, because I was writing down the things you were saying. I want to go back to them one by one, right?
Sure.
This person is, and I mentioned him a couple of weeks to you. I thought maybe you would guess, but you didn't, fortunately, because I threw you off historical personage and all that. Yeah. Rocco Francis Marchegiano, better known as Rocky Marciano, one of the greatest boxers of all time, right? Okay. Most interesting, the things you said, because I've been reading up on this guy. He fascinates me more and more. I mean, I like to watch boxing matches anyway. I hadn't for years when I started getting, and I specifically with him, but also the type of person he was. And I'm going to go back to things you said about him. You start out by saying extremely fiery, or the opposite.
Yeah.
Now, about him, what other great boxers said about him. For example, George Foreman, who never boxed with him because it was a different generation, right? Mm-hmm. Marciano was born in 1923. Foreman was born, I think, 1947 or something like that, right? So it could have been his father, right? But he said, because all these great boxers studied Rocky Marciano. They all studied him. Mike Tyson learned so much by studying the films from Joe Frazier as well, right? But George Foreman said, with Marciano, he was one of the toughest boxers of all time, because when the bell would ring, he'd come out and attack you until the bell rang from the governor's corner. Then second round, he would come out and attack. He'd be attacking you the whole time, even over 15 rounds. You said extremely fiery or not. Well, in his case, it was extremely fiery. It was like just totally awesome in the truest sense, like where this guy got his energy. We'll get into that later then. Then you said that a lot of Earth.
Yeah, a lot of
persons, you said, rooted in a systematized approach to reality. Yeah. Well, yes, because this person, this Marciano, everybody agrees this is probably the best trained boxer in history.
Ah, interesting.
Why? Because, and this is what fascinates me, they say, oh, you have to give your all, but basically nobody does. Cus D'Amato, who trained, he was like a father figure for Mike Tyson, right?
Yeah.
He said to Mike, hey, Marciano was about your size. It was just, they're both 5'10", right?
Yeah.
So he said, you have to fight the way he did. If you remember Mike Tyson, because he was short compared to like others who were 6'2", 6'4", you have to get in beyond their defenses and hit them with close. And that's what Tyson did because he was imitating Marciano.
Right.
And Cus D'Amato also took over some things, training elements, like Marciano had a special training bag, punching bag, 300 pounds. Others like 200 pounds. His was 300 pounds. And he got one of them from Mike Tyson. Other things in the training schedule of Marciano, he incorporated into Tyson's training schedule. But not really that many things, because he said even a Tyson wouldn't be able to do it. And psychologically, they wouldn't be able to do it, because the strange thing, and this is almost like an ET, like an extraterrestrial, about Marciano was, he trained 365 days a year.
Wow.
Most boxers go to training camp 3 months, might be 4 months. Well, he might be in camp for 3, 4. He could also be there for 7 months. And in the months when he wasn't training officially, he'd go out for like 10-mile runs on Christmas Day. This guy would train constantly.
Yeah.
Not because he had to discipline himself to do it, but because he loved doing like 200 push-ups or whatever it was. He would, if you imagine this, he would get up in the morning, like when he was in training camp, here in the morning, he'd go out and run for 12 or 15 miles.
Yeah.
Then he'd do calisthenics for like 2 hours plus. Then he might get into a swimming pool, like up to his neck, and punch a few hundred times underwater. Then he would have his spark. At the end of the day, he would then go for a power walk of another 10 miles. In training camp, he would not allow calls from outside. Like even his family wasn't supposed to call him for months. He wouldn't have a radio to listen. Back, it was before TV was in general use.
Yeah.
He wouldn't want to listen to in the evening to relax. No radio, no calls. It was 100% training. And even when he wasn't in training camp, it was like, get up, do a 10-mile run. Do this. The guy was a total phenomenon, and it's been said that no other boxer would be able to keep up with that, and they wouldn't want to do it either.
Yeah.
Which is why he was the best. Whenever he fought, he was 100% fit. And this is why he could go 15 rounds and he wouldn't tire. He'd come out in the 12th round and still throw a few hundred punches in that round too, because he could throw 100 in a fight. He would throw hundreds and hundreds of punches, and he would not tire. I mean, I guess, relative to the 12th round, he wasn't as strong as in the first, obviously, but the opponents didn't notice it. When he won the championship against Jersey Joe Walcott, I think it was in, 52, 53. And Walcott he was the champion then, obviously, because Rocky then took the championship from him. Walcott was winning. People say, oh, well, he wasn't that good at that point in his career. He was still very good. He was number 1 in the world, Walcott. And he was winning in rounds over Rocky. Going to the 13th round, Rocky was going to lose that fight. But he came out and he knocked him out then. He just refused to lose.
Yeah.
His record in boxing, he's the only heavyweight in history of a perfect record. He had 49 wins, 0 losses, and 0 draws. Nobody ever achieved that. Now people say, think of this Earth here, right? Yeah. The Earth, the physical, the Virgo sun, the Taurus moon, and the ascendant in Capricorn. This person was an extremely physical person. Yeah. Muhammad Ali once said about him, because they became friends then. There were different generations who didn't fight each other. But then they did a little bit, because I think in 1968, they wanted to do an early computer simulation. Who would have won, Rocky or Cassius Clay? Maybe you remember that. Yeah. So they had to both get together and do like light sparring just to get the movements for this computer thing, right? And so it was light sparring. But Ali said afterwards, Rocky, even his light punches were really hard punches. And he got to know.
I recall hearing that about him, that it was just like being.
And Ali got to be a friend of his. He got to know him personally. Well, the way he thought, he said, Marciano was the toughest fighter in history. He said that even tougher than Joe Frazier. And he said, I didn't even think that was possible. interesting too about Marciano, get another aspect of his personality here. Okay, well let's keep first of all the things you were saying, because it sounded like in some things you weren't on the mark, but you were astrologically closer than you thought.
Yeah.
You said a certain philosophical bent, right, and discerning. Well, he wasn't a philosopher in that sense, but he was a very good person. He had his ideals. In that sense, he was philosophical. For example, Italian American. I mean, a poor neighborhood, mafia all around him. But he never succumbed to the mafia. He never wanted to. He would never, take a dive, throw a fight. He didn't want any of this crooked stuff from the mafia. But the mafia, fortunately, just idolized him because he was Italian American, and even because he was a good guy, they thought, this is great. An Italian American who's not like us, he's a good guy. But one thing I say about Rocky, as brave as he was, because this guy was fearless just totally fearless, and impervious to pain. It's like there's one fight he had where his eye was all bashed up. Any modern day referee would have called the fight, but also his nose was split. You could open it up like a flap, and he was still fighting. He didn't care.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, nobody's like this, right? He didn't feel the pain, and he didn't care. He just wasn't going to lose. But with the mafia, he did give in to him in part because when like a mafia don on occasion invited him to dinner when Rocky was famous, he didn't want to say no because of, well, I'm not going to collaborate with him, but I don't want to offend him either because that could cost him his life. You just don't do that if you're famous Italian American. You don't refuse a dinner invitation. So he would go to dinner with him, but he wasn't crooked. Now, it's been said he might have cheated on his taxes. Yes, almost certainly, but that doesn't, in my mind, doesn't really make him crooked, if you know what I mean. Now, he did get into some deals with people who needed money for a business. He would lend them money at interest. He's a good Virgo. He thought, well, you pick up some interest. On the other hand, if that folded and he lost money, he never threatened them. Can you imagine having Rocky Marciano threaten you, come in your place, hey, you owe me $10,000, where is it? But he never did that. He said, oh, well, just lost the money. So he was somewhat of he wasn't an intellectual in that sense, but he was philosophical. So he had a code of ethics that he adhered to. Also, something else about him that's, I think, remarkable. He never spoke badly about people. Like, boxers do that routinely. Listen to some of the things that Frazier said about Ali. I mean, after the big fight, he had trash talk, but they said, well, I do admire him. But then once again, the trash talk, he never did it. When others did it, he would change the subject or just remain silent. He was such a decent guy. Some of his former opponents became friends of his. He got along well with Joe Louis. He didn't even want to fight Joe Louis because that was his boyhood hero, and then he beat him. But Joe Louis was 38 by the time, and he had retired already. But he was still he was the favorite in that fight, 6-5 favorite. And Marciano still beat him. That was before he was a champion. Some guy he almost killed in the ring, a Carmine Bingo. This was one of his earlier fights before he was champion. And he hit the guy so hard, he was totally out, like for, I think, a couple of weeks or something. He was in the hospital. Rocky stayed in the hospital all night praying that he didn't die. He was about to give up boxing. But this Bingo became a friend and said, no, you can't give up boxing. You're so talented. But this Marciano had a system of ethics. He was a good person. Everybody says he was such a likable person. Ali said, he's such a great guy. They became friends, and they were planning. I didn't know this before, but one time when they met, Rocky said, Mohammed, why don't there's so much racial tension in America. Why don't we do a tour, a champion of 50s, champion of the 60s, to show that white and black can get along together? Ali jumped on the idea, said, my God, this is great. We can go to Watts and show these kids there. No, whites are not our enemies. We can be friends. He was totally enthusiastic. But then, as you know, Marciano died in a plane crash not that long thereafter. And Ali's wife said that was one of only 2 occasions when she saw Ali break down and cry when he heard about it.
Yeah.
That's how deep their friendship was. These 2 great champions. Ali said he doesn't know if he in his prime could have beaten Marciano's prime because Marciano's techniques were such that Clay's strategies wouldn't have worked against him. But then Marciano said he doesn't know if he could have beaten Ali. A total respect between these 2 great fighters. But in another way, they're totally different. Ali was the braggart and boastful and disrespectful, and Rocky was the total opposite. In private, Rocky did say that Ali, he's such a braggart, etc., because he didn't like that stuff. But then when they met each other, they got along famously. But let's go more things you said here. Great capacity for emotion. You say writings. Well, he's not a writer. He was only semi-literate. But then you said over dramatize. Well, I mean, really, I mean, this guy was famous throughout the entire world as a fighter.
Yeah.
Any of his fights was a big event, especially once he became champion.
Yeah.
Now you say other people's money, handling money. You said he handles money. This is interesting because he had a manager who was a total exploiter. He signed him on when Rocky was just starting out, 50% for the manager, not just of the fights, but of everything he did. If he gave a speech and made $1,000, he wanted 500 of that.
Yeah.
And Rocky was so sick of it. That's the main reason why he quit boxing at only 32 with an unbeaten record. He said, I don't want that son of a gun to get any more money. Yeah. And he passed up an offer that would have brought in for him like $500,000 just because he didn't want this guy to get the other $500,000. That's how much he despised this exploiter. I forget what the guy's name was. His manager was just a total exploiter. But then it was interesting because, say, he handles people money. Then he would do like maybe some deal where he give a talk someplace and maybe it was for $5,000. Say, look, you know what? One guy handed him a check. He said, you know what? Give me it in cash instead of a check. He didn't want the bank trail, so this guy could find out and ask for the money. Although in the end, he would have gotten half anyway, but he just didn't want that guy to get the money. This was like towards the end of his career. But he was always watching out for money because he was so poor when he was young. And he would always be, he was one of those boxers who didn't waste his money. You know, like Ali ended up almost broke. That's why they get back in the fights with Larry Holmes and almost got killed. I mean, Holmes just totally beat him up. Or Mike Tyson, who had to come, fight again and again because he was broke. No, Rocky, with the money he had, he didn't have the sums they had either, but he just totally, like my mother, who was a Virgo, totally took care of the money.
Yeah.
So the handling of money, you were right there. And then you say deep dives into the subconscious. Well, not exactly, but deep dives into the brains of other people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because his punch was one of the strongest. They say one of his punches had the energy equivalent of deadlifting 1,000 pounds 1 foot off the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. He totally just hit people like, unbelievable.
Yes, so deep dives. Also, he would just dive onto the people, just go totally after him, but it wasn't into the subconscious. That's when you were still thinking he might have been intellectual, right? Yeah. Capacity to organize. Well, like I said, his training, organized down to the last detail. He would take a walk with a friend, like power walk, but he'd keep dropping something. Why? Just so he would have to bend down to pick it up, because that was more training on how to dodge. Yeah. So he organized totally. You're right there. Codify information. Yes, people have accused him of being clumsy with his footwork, like of a street brawler. And he would waist punch, he'd just be punching their arms. But he confided in somebody, he said, people think that I'm just, kind of wild and not really an artistic boxer. He said they don't really get it. The reason why I'm punching their arms, I'm hitting the nerve centers. He said the soft spots.
Yeah.
And so that's going to weaken their punches. And in effect, so many people he fought said they didn't feel their arms for days or they had pain for days. One guy needed a nerve operation on his arm like a day or two after the fight. That was planned. I call this guy the Lieutenant Columbo of boxing, if you remember Peter Falk, who was born, I think, the 3rd of September, not the 1st, but there's also a Virgo. And now with Columbo, the character, we don't know the birthday, but he's like a Virgo. He's humble, and everybody says that Rocky was so humble. He was polite to people, just like Lieutenant Columbo, but he was observing, and he really was much better. And they thought, I get this Lieutenant Columbo, he's not going to beat me, but he always did, and that was Rocky Marciano as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. This Virgo humility, but planning very well and knowing just what you're doing, but fooling the others think you're just, you're not capable. But he was extremely capable. And as a boxer, he was highly intelligent.
Yeah,
actually,
dismantling his opponents with surgical precision. That certainly sounds very...
or just if he didn't have the opening, just pummeling their arms or their hips or whatever, knowing I can throw hundreds and hundreds of punches more than they can, so I'm just going to weaken them however I can. In that sense, you said scientific bent. Well, we wouldn't compare that to a science exactly, but in a sense,
yes, science. That's what boxing is.
It's this analytical nature that Virgo has so much, and how can I achieve this? And interesting too, you mentioned, let's see here, engender tremendous amounts of money. Well, that's obvious. He certainly did that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Jupiter trine Pluto. Yeah.
You said discriminating brain. Well, we just talked about that. Performer, theater. Well, Madison Square Garden and many other places, of course.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even though you didn't know who it was at all, and you suspected intellectual, but still so many things you can see how astrology can show us certain things, but once again, you can't tell the intellectual level. So
no, but you get, I think you get a sense of the quality of the brain here. The all
yes,
that Virgo,
yes.
and and the Mercury Saturn. You see that there's a certain what's the word we would use? There's a systematized approach to whatever it is. I mean, I find it interesting that Mars isn't more prominent.
I thought the same thing. Now, yes, it's in a wide conjunction with the Sun. I thought maybe it's in parallel declination, but it's not in parallel to the Sun. Yeah. He doesn't have any.
I mean, it does govern the midheaven, and it's but yeah, it's not. Is it under the sun's beams? Yeah, it's under the sun's beams now, which is interesting. So, I mean, it's
but it's closer Venus Sun, right? Well, he was a pleasant personality. Everybody said that, but you wouldn't expect that to be the boxing element.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But okay. Well, Uranus in the cusp of the second house, at least in the midheaven chart or the 30-degree from ascendant chart. Where is it in Placidus? I guess it's in the first house or what? I don't have the Placidus chart up here now.
It's on the cusp of two.
Also in the cusp of the second house. Yeah, one could talk about the money making in an Uranian fashion somehow. I mean, it is an unusual way to make money. Beating people up and getting beaten up.
Well, Uranus.
There are a lot of bucks around, but nonetheless
has its associations with radio and television, though. So the idea of making
and of course he was wildly
through popular entertainment. And interesting, the moon, of course, has a lot to do with appeal to the wider world, the public, So
I thought you should have gone into that moon in cusp 4 because, of course, he had the Italian-American heritage, as you do.
Yeah.
And he always resented the fact that so many people thought, Italian, we must, mafia connections, all that sort of thing, because his family wasn't like that. His family was apparently a quite decent family. His father worked in some shoe factory making shoes and was really poor. And then Rocky gave his father a large sum of money so he wouldn't have to work anymore. He had promised he would do that. I mean, the family connections were strong there in any case with this moon.
Yeah, that would definitely.
Cusp 4 in Taurus.
That. Yeah. And of course, Taurus, is in a different way than Virgo. They are people who are concerned about security, and about making sure that things are as they should be,
interesting too in that respect with the Earth element. I have a friend, lives in Germany, has the midheaven and moon and Mars conjunction in Taurus. And he keeps in shape, not a boxer or anything. He keeps in shape, but for him it's always been endurance sport, like bicycling, cycling 200 kilometers. Or it's always this endurance thing. And interesting, Rocky, it's explosive sport, boxing, but it was about the endurance, this constant training.
Yeah.
This constant 365 days a year. People say they never saw anything like it. And his trainer would say, okay, Rocky, you threw 300 punches. You better rest now. He said, no, let me throw a few hundred more. They were always afraid he would burn himself out, but he never did. He had this amazing stamina, endurance.
Yeah, I've heard some commentators talk about Mars in Taurus, but I would think it would probably extend itself to Virgo as well to a certain extent. The idea that when even though we would traditionally look at that and say, Mars in Taurus detriment, Mars in Virgo, peregrine, but they have argued, and I think there's some truth to this, that when Mars is in an Earth sign, that the fiery nature of it is more readily contained, so it can. It's like Mars in Capricorn is usually considered to be the long distance runner, right? Because of the Mars Saturn notion. But Mars in Taurus, the same idea. That impulsiveness. That even though obviously in many ways he capitalized on that as part of his strategy. But just the sheer endurance that you find when Mars is in an Earth sign rather than in a fire sign. Because in the fire sign, of course, it would have a tendency to maybe burn itself out.
Right. Yeah.
So
and here, it's taking all the fire behind it. In the case of Mars, his Mars at 0 Virgo, so all of the sign of Leo behind it. But now it's going to Virgo. Now let's analytically put this into practice. You know. But
Yeah, 'cause
nonetheless,
it's
I never would have
interesting,
guessed this was a boxer, I have to say. I would say maybe something physical. But
yeah, I mean, with all the Earth, it certainly would suggest that. As I said, I'm surprised that Mars isn't more angular, but it does, as I said, does govern the midheaven. And
well, if we look at the chart with equal houses, Mars is still in the 8th house there. But if you put that up on the screen for a minute, let's look at that one. For a minute. The one chart 1, right, with the equal houses from the ascendant, but still on the ecliptic. What I always look at when I look at a chart, a planet that's most elevated. In his case, most elevated, that is the one, well, whose zenith, that is the point of the Earth under which that planet was directly. I say that for the listeners. You know what that is anyway. But the planet closest to his place of birth in that sense was Saturn, not Jupiter. Jupiter was at its highest, just around its highest point in the day, in its daily cycle. But Saturn was the one closest to place of birth. And so we have this Saturn element of, well, the Saturnian, the discipline, the hard work, because he worked, his trainer said when he first took Rocky, he tended to be overweight. He was already starting to become bald at the age of 23, and he walked like a duck, and he was only 5'10". But he said, if you want to be a contender for anything, you have to do this. And Rocky did everything plus more. And this is the Saturn. This is the total, what we would call total discipline. But then if you look at Jupiter on the other side, Jupiter and Mercury, those three being the most elevated planets, it was loving it, like suffering every day and loving it. If you remember Maxwell Smart, and loving it. And also the mercurial planning it, right? Like this. This time I get up and I do this and I do this, and he does it all the time, and he does it with joy. People, even if you're not in boxing, and I never boxed, I was in martial arts, but never boxing, don't get my face all beat up. Really. But if you think of the basic principle here of somebody who gives really 100% of himself for something. Some boxers love the boxing part, but then, coach, I have to know, do I have to do even more calisthenics? Yeah, you do it. They have to kind of push him, right? He never had to be pushed. He had to be pushed to stop. Imagine if you're, say, a musician, and you just live for your instrument. Everything in your day is just how I'm going to become a better instrumentalist. Every single thing. I've never done that in my life, even though I can be much more intense than most people, believe me. But I've never given 100%, sad to say. Maybe in spurts, but not to the point where I'm going to get better in astrology, and it's going to be, well, I did have faith like that when I first started, that's true, like doing up to 15 hours a day with astrology, but not planning my entire life that everything I did was astrological. And over years, I never did that in any area. And how many people do? Practically nobody. So what can we learn from a person like that? That's what interests me. I don't want to get into boxing, especially not at my age. I'm not crazy.
No, I can definitely relate to that idea of wanting to achieve, perfection, because, I did have a reasonable operator career. I never really made the big time, but I had an international career for a number of years. And I had the good fortune at one point to meet someone who sort of allowed me to move to a higher level. But even though I haven't really sung professionally in quite a while now, I have continued to work on my voice as often as I can, and sometimes, depending on what our schedule is, if we're not traveling, several days a week. And I've constantly sought, to, as much as is feasible with what my experience in this life, to achieve a level of accomplishment and perfection, which
definitely,
when I was having a career, I was utterly clueless about it. Right. So, I mean, it is entirely self-motivated. And so for all intents and purposes, I would consider myself largely self-taught as a singer. And I don't have quite as many planets in Virgo as he did, but I have two. And I think that
well, that's like me with music and also with astrology. We do things and we've achieved a pretty good level in those things. But what fascinates me is that for this person, it was only one thing.
Yeah, it was only one thing.
It wasn't one thing and another thing, so you divide your... No, it was only one thing, and he didn't start boxing till late. It was in the army, became an amateur boxer, and then won a championship there. I thought, hey, I'm going to get into boxing. So he had a natural talent, obviously. But then from then on, it was only the one thing. Total obsession with the one thing. I want to point out that Pluto, and let's get back to this Pluto that he had in the sixth house. Pluto for me is always intensity.
Intensity, passion.
You mentioned the health aspect of 6.
Yeah.
For him, health, it was this total training, also with his diet. They didn't have to say, "Oh, you better not eat that." No. He would say when he went to his mom, "No spaghetti. I can't eat those carbohydrates." What? No, only meat. But Rocky, you have to. No. Sorry, only this. Total discipline. Total even in the diet. So everything was of just total intensity. Also, the 6th house has something in common with the 7th. I often interpret the houses the other way around, starting from the ascendant, because that's the cycle of the day, right? The planet is not setting in house 12, it's rising in house 12.
Right.
So I think we should have
the diurnal motion. Yeah.
Yes, the complementary system of interpretation. Houses 6 and 7, or any two houses near a main axis point, share in their meaning somewhat. They both have to do with what we encounter. The type of people we encounter. And here we have the closest planet to house, the cusp 7, is Pluto.
Is Pluto, yeah.
And so he encounters the Plutonian. He was encountering big, tough guys, some of them criminal. They wanted to kill him. They wanted to beat him up, right? So about his encounters, I thought that was kind of interesting there. He also has Neptune towards the end of the 7th house. We go into that, what that could mean. Neptunian relationships. Would you like to expound on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to, obviously, I don't know anything about his life, but,
well, first of all, as I mentioned before, in contracts, it's also the 7th house. This exploiter, this manager of his, totally exploiting him.
Deception.
Well, that's 7. He was deceived in the biggest contract of his life and suffered for years because of it, having to give 50% to that rat.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's not something we could have predicted just by seeing his chart, but it does fall within the realm of a Neptune in 7th, right? Although his marriage seems to have been stable.
Mm-hmm.
They say that after he was champion, he did spend some money. Every once in a while he went to a prostitute. I'm not going to condemn him for that. I don't go to prostitutes. Just say it. I'm not just saying that. It's not my thing, really. But, men will be men, and I'm not going to condemn him for that. If it's true. I'm not even sure if it's been confirmed true. But his marriage didn't fall apart. After all, he's Italian-American.
Yeah. Well,
and nobody in his family ever said anything bad about him. Nobody in his family ever said, "Oh, that Rocky, he did it." Nobody. So I'm not sure if I actually even believe that. Maybe it's true. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, there's that Madonna whore duality with particularly, I think, with Italian men and Roman Catholicism. Where the wife becomes the the mother over time, and they want to find their sexual outlets elsewhere, but.
This Neptune, is something in astrology we see this too. This is a moon and Venus, right?
Yeah.
Men are attracted to women who have something, activating their Venus, because it's the woman as the lover. But then when you get in a relationship, then it's woman as the moon. I won't even say mother figure, although they connect to that, of course, but it's the moon figure, right? And that's that's something different. And you might be looking for one thing romantically, but something else for stability. But this is getting off the mark here. But
the moon is the whole complex of things that are associated with the feminine. So, family.
It's more basic than Venus, but it's more connected, to the roots, right? The mother being whence you come, and the family, and the country you come from, and you come from the earth. It's all these things, and that's more the moon. But Venus is more the erotic, the pleasure seeking, the falling in love at first sight, this sort of thing.
Yeah, certainly with Mars conjunct Venus, there's the implication that he would have easily found liaisons, through his...
just because of his fame. I mean, some of these other boxers would just go through women like, because, they could get him because they're so famous, right? And he could have done that. I see no evidence that he was doing that, like had, strings of lovers and that sort of thing.
Now, Neptune in the 7th, too, I think does convey a certain idealized perspective on relationship. So
most likely. And they said he lived like a monk in a way, with all this training and thing. It was just, concentrating on things. And then the religious, he was religious, quite religious, old time Catholic, and his parents had come from the old country, so
that elevated Saturn, that's And, with governing the ascendant, I mean, there is a certain asceticism associated with Saturn. I mean, just on the idea that on one level it can relate to privation and want, but that can be voluntary, privation and want, which he clearly had no trouble.
If he hadn't done it voluntarily, life would have thrust it upon him. This gets to the idea of sacrifice.
Yeah,
I don't think people understand, in the old world, well, say in ancient times, what sacrifice was really about. Maybe I get into that a bit, because this is very relevant for astrology. Say you're a person who just loves to enjoy life. You're not into disciplining yourself very much or whatever. You just like to enjoy life. But then you do astrology, see a Saturn transit. Oh my God, you're afraid of Saturn. Then Saturn comes, and then you have certain privations, certain limitations. Then the party you want to go to has been canceled, and et cetera, right? Yeah. The ancients, when they did sacrifice, there was something, of course, very religious about it. And I'm talking about when sacrifice first started, saying, well, who knows when it started. But the idea was this. Those ancient peoples probably were at least instinctively aware of certain astrological things. They related to the gods. All these planets have godly names, obviously. And so the idea was, okay, we know when Saturn comes, for example, we're gonna have to suffer. So the idea was, we're going to control our suffering. We're going to take our best sheep that we don't want to kill, but we're going to kill it to give Saturn what he's expecting. I'm going to make myself suffer, because then I won't have to suffer something that Saturn gives me that I'm not expecting. That was the beginning of sacrifice. Now, what it degenerated into was that after a while, okay, we have to sacrifice a
virgin to the volcano.
Well, that's even a further step of degeneration. But hey, Flaminius, where's the weakest little sheep we have? That one that was sick anyway. Okay, we're going to sacrifice it. In other words, we don't really want to lose anything. So then Saturn would make him suffer. Now, whether it really works that way, I don't know. But it's the idea with a person who willingly tortures themselves, put it that way, or disciplines themselves, I should say.
Yeah, well, that's like discipline. In this case, what is discipline? Discipline is voluntary sacrifice, right? I mean, you want to go out and play ball, but you're a child prodigy pianist, and so you want to become the concert pianist, so you practice instead, right?
Yeah, well, I like to put it in positive. Well, you're right. Voluntary sacrifice. That's what you said, right? Voluntary sacrifice.
Well, no,
I put it this way. Yeah, discipline is the other pole from passion, in a sense.
Yeah.
The less passion you have, the more discipline you need.
Yeah.
So with Rocky, in a way, I don't think that was discipline. I don't think he was torturing himself. Mom, I can only eat meat, or I'm going to do an extra, how many push-ups or whatever. I don't think that was sacrifice for him. He seemed to love doing it. Everybody said he seemed to love doing it. So it was like the pianist that thinks, I want to play baseball, but no, I'm just going to do piano. I'm just going to love it. Forget about baseball.
Yeah, of course.
By the way, Marciano was also an excellent baseball player. He tried out, I think, for the Chicago. I forget what team it was.
The Cubs.
It wasn't the Red Sox, I don't believe, but he had traveled with some of his friends.
Yeah.
But he wasn't quite good enough to make any minor league team, which is good for. I don't think he would have been such a great baseball player compared to what he was in boxing.
Maybe a great slugger, which means he wouldn't have to.
He could have been a big home run hitter, but with a lot of strikeouts, and I don't think he would become another Babe Ruth, though. I don't. It just wasn't fated. But you never know if he had loved that as much as he did. But he didn't make out the team. But once again, the physical aspect of his being. I want to ask about something else. We know how he died, in that fateful plane crash.
Yeah.
And by the way, people, there's a movie that I saw last week. I learned a few things about life, but then I looked it up more. I'd been reading about him before anyway. In 1997, about Rocky Marciano. I forget what the name of the main actor is. It's not Hollywood quality, but it's a pretty good movie. A lot of things are brought out. But it ends before he even has the title fight. Nonetheless, it's really pretty good if you want to get in this boxer. Even if you're not interested in boxing, he's a fascinating personality for me. Somebody who gives really 100%. Okay, but now we know he died in a plane crash. I wouldn't have been able to say that directly, but he does have Mars at the beginning of his 8th house, at least in equal houses, I think also in Placidus, right?
Yeah.
Let me get that up on the screen.
Yeah.
So, no, Placidus has in 7th house.
Yeah.
I'm seeing here.
But in the 8th house, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mars in Placidus houses, Mars is in 7th house. In 30-degree houses, in the cusp of the 8th, right?
Yeah.
You see it. So once again here, well, the 30-degree houses showed a little more precisely there because of the cusp of the 8th, and he had a violent death. It was a plane crash. Now, how we can see it was specifically a plane crash. Well, okay, we can say the ruler of his Mars, Mercury, was in the 9th house, so he was traveling. It wasn't like falling and hitting his head on the bathtub or in his home, you know. Yeah. It was during his travels.
9th house is usually more long-distance travel airfare than it would be a car crash.
For example, yeah, we could get to it there. Interesting, Uranus in the 2nd house, because the 2nd and 8th, that's also the physical, right? So even though it's not in an opposition to Mars there, yeah, because it's like, 16 degrees orb, which is a pretty wide orb. But it is in the 2nd house of the body, right? I mean, you think of his explosive punches, but also the way he died. I think 2nd house could have something to do with that as well. And the cusp of the 2nd house, physical, is an Aquarius, which would be very much related to air or flying. Yeah. And so we would have then Mars cusp, a conjunction cusp 8, but opposition the 2nd house.
Yeah.
Although I admit I would not have seen that he's going to die in a plane crash, but with Mars at cusp of the 8th, if I didn't know who it was, I would say a high probability of a quick death, and maybe through accident.
Yeah. Yeah, Mars is in a minor aspect to Uranus, quindecimate, but,
that's harmonic 24 for you harmonic fans out there. It's half of a... Well, the distance for harmonic 12 or 30-degree distances, like semi-sextile or quincunx. Yeah. But half of that step of 30 degrees would be 15 degrees. Harmonic 24, it's composed of the harmonic numbers 8 and 3. Or put it another way, in parentheses, 2 times 2 times 2, close parentheses, times 3. So it has more of the 2 quality than the 3 quality.
Yeah.
So it's more of a tense aspect than a harmonious aspect is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, a lot of people associate that with obsession. And interesting, we could then, if we argue that they're in aspect relationship, this also shows us the particular genius that he had for his own career, his boxing career, Mars, Uranus. If I were doing this in depth myself, I would look at the Mars-Uranus midpoint because, of course, that has a lot to do with accidents. And
can we calculate it quickly in our minds? Are we still young enough to be able to do that? To very quickly come up with well, let's give it a try, Grandpa.
Okay.
I would say here it's about 7.5 degrees in Gemini.
Gemini, Sagittarius, right? So is there anything?
Am I getting this right? Yeah, in Gemini, I believe so, right?
Yeah.
7.5 Gemini, Sagittarius. I don't see. Is there anything there? I don't see that often. Whether the transits to that at the time. Well, his sun was square that. His sun was.
Oh
square
yeah,
that.
Definitely. Now, see, that could definitely indicate.
So it might be onto something there with that midpoint. Something else, Mars-Uranus, interesting that you wouldn't be able to see here. I have an aspectarium that I did for that, and using aspects up to harmonic 12. I've noticed with harmonic 11, I've been studying that a lot. Now, John Addy, who was one of the first to mention that, it's for people out there not into harmonics or into astrology. If you think of a square, what is that? That's 360 degrees divided by something. It equals 90 degrees. It's divided by 4, right? So we call the 90-degree aspect, the square, we call that the 4th harmonic because you have to divide 360 degrees by 4 to get the 90-degree distance. So that 4 is called the harmonic number of the square. You got that, people? You know that anyway, Michelangelo. But now for harmonic 11, what is it? Well, we divide 360 degrees by 11, and we get a distance of 32 degrees and 9-minute intervals, which is hard to see in your head because imagine it's like 32 and a half, and then it's 65 something, and then it's et cetera. So
97.
I said 98, 130, and 152 or 3, something like that, right? Anyway, with the aspectarium I called here, and first of all, about a harmonic 11, Addy said that there's somehow exaggerations, because he knows some alcoholics tend to have them, he said, but he didn't really get into them. I don't think exaggerations is the most basic meaning. I think it's a connection that's very, very intense. There's something Plutonian about it.
Yeah.
He had Mars-Uranus in one of those aspects. In that aspect, a series of 11, and that would be the Mars-Uranus, the explosive violence of a boxing match. Yeah. Last night I watched one, what was it, the third fight in Manila between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Did you see that fight?
The Thriller in Manila? I must
The Thriller in Manila, yeah. Oh my God, the way they were going at each other. It was the most brutal thing I've ever seen, really.
Yeah, I recall that. That was pretty
yeah, but anyway, that's
intense.
The nature of boxing, right? It's this Mars-Uranus Plutonian equality. So that's what we have, this 11th harmonic, this intensity between Mars and Uranus. And then he died once again in a plane crash. Mars, violent death, but connected to the planet Uranus is connected to Aquarius and planes, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
To go back to our midpoint consideration with that Mars-Uranus midpoint, with Sun square that midpoint from the 8th, I think there's certainly a strong indication that, death from an accident, with Sun in the 8th. But yeah, and Mars-Uranus, if you think about boxing, I mean, there are these periods of comparative, quietus where they're just feeling each other, and all of a sudden this explosive flurry of, mayhem,
Right. And, it's pretty incredible. And not a sport I would like to practice because I value my face.
Well,
but nonetheless,
they call it the sweet science. I mean, I think the best boxers are those who have this inherent discipline, even if they don't necessarily, that they.
Yeah, that they don't have that, and also the body for it, and the total will. In the case of Rocky,
you have to have that.
It wasn't that physically by nature he was totally perfect for it. He was too short, for example, to be a heavyweight and such things. But he made up for that and then some with his complete will, just total will. This I'm going to do. And that's how he can be, of course, an inspiration to people. Any other thing? Should we end it here? We've gotten in pretty much.
Yeah, no, I think it's been a really interesting discussion. I mean, it's interesting to see how, some of these abstract notions, while were at least initially pointing me to a different type of person. And I think if I had seen Mars with greater prominence, I might have felt that there was an athlete involved here.
Yeah, you don't, right. But I'm just noticing now that we didn't talk about the grand trine of Jupiter, Pluto, and Uranus. The three of them are in trine.
Yeah, I did notice that. Yeah.
Which means, the street, but making of money. I think you had mentioned that before.
Yeah, well, Jupiter, Pluto.
The Jupiter, Pluto, but then we have the Jupiter, Uranus as well, this Uranian aspect, right?
Yeah.
And he was, by the way, as a boxer, he was very unconventional. Everybody said that about him.
That's the idiosyncrasy, the individual genius of Uranus,
Yeah, and any other thoughts on that?
Well, Jupiter, Uranus would be
there?
Well, trine. It's a water trine, so we associate water, of course, with feeling, but again, maybe it's more about the kind of intuitive insight that would allow him to know precisely what to do in order to easily incapacitate his opponents.
So something on an intuitive level.
Yeah.
That
it's actually, we don't quite have a kite with that. We almost have a kite with the moon, but because it's not really opposite Jupiter, we don't. But so that trine does have an outlet to something. So it's not an enclosed trine, which means that he'll have a capacity to actually utilize it in ordinary life. It's not something. So again, I would think that there would be a certain intuitive native cunning, maybe that's a word we could use, particularly with
something
involved.
Instinctual, perhaps, because that's sort of the way he seemed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and Moon Uranus might suggest that too, that sort of instinctive, intuitive brilliance, that we wouldn't necessarily categorize as being intellectual, but nevertheless is something that clearly made him, a master of what he sought to master.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get to the deepest secrets of people from a chart, and you really can't do that, by the way. Once again, I want to point out the limits of astrology. That there's no way we could tell everything about somebody just by their chart. Nonetheless, I think this has shown just how much you can see.
Yeah, definitely.
And the Uranus in the second house, once again, when it just was stressed this unconventionality of his entire style. And people would say, oh, he's not conventional, he's not this, because he's just a brawler, he's not really a boxer. But some famous trainers, I forget who it was, said, they would all criticize him because he was unconventional, he's like a street brawler. But they weren't criticizing him anymore when they're lying unconscious on the canvas. It's and that about sums it up. This guy was a winner because he decided, I'm going to be a winner, I'm not going to lose, and I'm going to give 100%. And granted, we're not all cut out for that in any area, no matter what area you love. Who really gives 100%? Practically nobody. And it's not even good. I wouldn't even suggest that people do that unless they really love it. But if you have to do it through discipline, you're going to get depressed. Since we're both musicians, Leopold Godowski, the pianist.
Yeah, sure, Godowski, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He practiced like 11, 12 hours a day or more. But the guy was totally depressed. He was totally depressed. He was one of the greatest pianists in the world. He had terrible stage fright. I could have helped him with that. Terrible stage fright, which is, I guess, why he practiced so much. He played everything perfectly. But so he dedicated himself, 24 hours a day, but he was totally depressed. People really shouldn't do that unless you totally are into the discipline, into every step of the way. But if you can do that, you are blessed indeed. And I think this man truly was blessed in that sense. A shame that he had to die so young. They couldn't do that tour, his friend Ali, and he would have been great. But the unconventionality here, that Uranus being the closest planet to his ascendant there.
Yeah.
Conventional. Well, I think
a genius of sorts,
yes, he was. He was. People these days they play him down. Oh, he didn't fight Foreman. He couldn't have. He would have. He would have stepped in the ring with Foreman. And Foreman, I think, also is like the toughest guy he ever saw. So who knows?
Yeah, and Foreman hit people pretty hard.
Oh my God! I think he was. I think he was a harder puncher. I think Foreman was the harder puncher. Yeah. But he certainly didn't have that degree of stamina, as Ali pointed out when he beat him, right? So who knows? That's another subject.
To return to our musical analogy, how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice, practice, practice. I mean,
yes.
What's the received wisdom these days? 10,000 hours of concerted application towards something you want to master should be sufficient to allow you to do it. And clearly this man had the discipline to achieve that threshold and
the passion, the pure passion to do it, or limited scope. I don't know. I can't figure it out yet. Maybe it's just having blinders on. This is it for my life. Maybe it's just that, and maybe our minds are just too open for so many different things. And
I think there's something to be said for that idea that, you, in order to master one thing, you have to focus on it to the exclusion of most everything else.
Yeah.
Maybe we're too much Renaissance magi who got marooned in the late 20th century, and so we want to be diversified, but not everybody is,
Anyway, this is an homage to Rocky Marciano. I don't think this is the anniversary of anything. It's not his birthday. I don't think it's of his death day either. But nonetheless, I think it was an interesting experiment. Thank you for being a guinea pig there in the first 16, 17 minutes, going out on a limb. But yeah, you were really pretty close in a lot of ways with the basic principles.
Yeah.
Quite fascinating. So thank you for that, Michelangelo.
You're very welcome, my friend. I enjoyed it. And, people will be able to hear my shame in due course.
No, I wouldn't say shame there. You were closer than you thought, I think. Okay, thanks again. And thanks for listening to us, people.
Yeah.
Goodbye for now.
Bye. Ciao for now, buddy.